This is the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to Jesus, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." Jesus said to them, "Go and tell that fox for me, 'Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed away from Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Occasionally when we hear a little Bible passage from the Bible on Sunday mornings, it's really hard to know what's happening in the bigger story. Today's Gospel reading is a good example of this struggle. Here are a few verses that seem to say some important things, but it's hard to really know what those things are without knowing a bit more about the who and the what and the why. So let's try to sort this out, shall we? First, let's clarify who the people are in this story, the characters, so to speak. Well, first there's Jesus. And this is halfway through the Gospel of Luke. And so Jesus has done enough ministry for people to have a little bit of sense about who he is and what he's come to do. Then there's the Pharisees, who were, of course, religious leaders in the time of Jesus, whose motives were always, well, a bit mixed and seemed self-serving at times. Then there's Herod. Herod was the king over much of the territory where Jesus was. This King Herod was the son of the King Herod that Heath mentioned earlier. But he's still after Jesus, just like his father. And the last mention of him in the Gospel of Luke before this story was when Herod was remembering he had beheaded John the Baptist. And one final group is Jerusalem, which is, of course, the name of a city, but who Jesus also refers to as a collective group of people. Jerusalem was the center of life and identity of God's people in Jesus' day. And so when Jesus speaks about Jerusalem, he's speaking about the place and the people who were made to be a holy city, a holy example of Israel's faith, but so often had failed. So those are our characters: Jesus, the Pharisees, Herod, and Jerusalem. So what is going on with them in this passage? Well, the Pharisees, those religious leaders with mixed motives, come to Jesus and tell him that Herod wants to kill him. It's hard to tell if they are really concerned about Jesus or not. But Jesus doesn't seem concerned, because look at how he responds. "Go and tell that fox for me, 'Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on the way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem.'" In other words, Jesus is saying, I'm not worried about Herod. I'm just going to keep on doing my work, doing what I was sent to do. Besides, I'm on my way to Jerusalem. And like so many who came before me, that's where I will be killed, in Jerusalem. And so Jesus isn't worried about the warnings of the Pharisees or the threats of Herod, not yet at least, because he knows he still has miles to go before he meets his fate. But Jesus isn't just resigned to this. He laments the fact that Jerusalem will be the place where his road ends. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, he says, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Jerusalem, that city on a hill, full of God's holy people, had gone astray. And so Jesus, speaking for himself and for God, regrets that this is the way it has to be. But this is the way it has to be. Jesus must go to Jerusalem, to those people, not to comfort them, but to be killed by them. Which brings us to the why. Why is Jesus saying this? Why is Jesus doing this? On the one hand, we might say because this is what he set out to do. Just a few chapters before this, in Luke 9, there's this verse that says, when the days drew near for him to be taken up, Jesus set his face to go to Jerusalem. Can't you just imagine this dramatic moment when Jesus knows the time has come to begin that long journey to Jerusalem where he would accomplish his purpose? He sets his face. He knows his path, and nothing is going to get in the way of that. Not the warning of the Pharisees, not the threats of Herod, and not even the sorrow Jesus feels for what Jerusalem had become. Why must Jesus go to Jerusalem? Because he knows where and how he must undergo great suffering and be rejected and killed and raised on the third day. Maybe in another sense, we can also appreciate that Jesus faces danger. What I mean is, in this little story, we can see just a few of the ways that Jesus knew the dangers that lie ahead for him, and yet he went toward them. Today, tomorrow, and the next day, I will do my work, Jesus says. I must be on my way, even toward the dangers of this world. Maybe we can appreciate that this week. This week that saw another act of violent terror in a place of worship. This week that saw floods ravage part of the Midwest. This week when we lost another member of our congregation. Here we are living still in this world so full of dangers. And thus we cling to the Lord, who doesn't run away from danger. This way of Jesus is still something we see in the darkest times. We see it in those who run toward violence to help the wounded. We see it in those who go toward the floods to rescue those who are distraught. We see it even in those who gather around the grieving to bear the burdens of sorrow. Yes, this is the way of Jesus. And this is the one we follow. Today, tomorrow, and always.